Well, it all started April 9th, 1995, when Christopher was born. He was born just a healthy baby, no problems. He did everything he was supposed to do in the hospital to get to go home. He seemed perfectly fine, and we left the hospital, and things turned out to be not so fine. It took a few weeks of him being home and not being able to eat, and when he did eat, he would spit everything up, and he was losing weight. He was originally 9 pounds when he was born, but he soon lost tons of weight. I mean, he was dangerously underweight. And so the process began of trying to figure out what was wrong, what was causing the problem. And of course, they thought it was a lot of different things to begin with. They thought it might be the flu, some real common things, or just that he had problems with swallowing or eating of some sort. And so he was put in the hospital, and they did a lot of tests, and it took about 6 months, but they finally figured out what was wrong with him. And the name of the actual disorder is called chronic Pseudo Obstruction syndrome. It's a very, very rare disease, and they think it's a genetic, and we didn't know he had it. We didn't even know there was a possibility that he could be born with this. He's actually our third son, and our other two sons don't have any signs of any type of digestive disorder, so it was completely unexpected. And the pregnancy was normal, so we never expected it. So it was really came out of the blue. When we did find out what it was, then obviously the game was to try to figure out how to fix it, or to try to figure out a way around it, basically, because we found out that there was no cure for it. So we basically had to find a way around, and that meant finding a way for him to eat. And so they came up with a system of using these feeding tubes. He actually had two. The first one went into his stomach, so it went from the outside in. It was surgically implanted, and that one was to drain out his stomach. His stomach didn't work at all. It was completely paralyzed. And so that we could drain out any saliva that he swallowed, and any bile that backed up into his stomach. It basically gave us access to his stomach. The second tube that they installed, they put lower down, and it went directly into his intestine itself. And that was the one that we actually used to feed him through. So that was basically how the system worked. Even though we were able to come up with a great solution to feed him, it doesn't mean that it wasn't without problems. There were a lot of struggles. The biggest problem, probably by far, was infection. And he spent a lot of time in the hospital and had a lot of surgeries around that issue, because feeding tubes are a foreign thing in your body, and your body wants to get rid of it. It doesn't want it to be there. And so there was just the problem with his body just trying to reject that, and infection getting in there and just causing all kinds of problems. And he spent pretty much the first 3 years of life in and out of the hospital. Total, he's had 14 surgeries, but and a lot of them were around that issue of getting rid of infections, because sometimes antibiotics just wouldn't work, and they had to go in and clean it out and then do antibiotics as well. But it was a constant problem. So there were other struggles too.
Yeah, just the hassle of dealing with a backpack and having to be fed 14 hours a day?
Yeah, in the beginning.
Yeah, a lot of that happened overnight. So we'd set up an IV pole and, connect it up to the lower tube, so that'd go directly into his intestine throughout the evening. But then during the day sometime, there was a backpack that he had to wear. And it was funny, actually. There was some instances, like, for example, going through the airport on security where they wouldn't let us bring the backpack, and we'd have to show them what it was. Yeah. But we had to make up these tubes. We called them tubes. Basically, they're IV bags that would go directly into his intestines with the formula. And so if we went on any trips at all, that was kind of a hassle, because then we're carrying extra suitcases full of bags and paraphernalia and going through airports and taking an hour and a half to get through security. And that was certainly part of the struggles. I don't know how much of that Christopher really, dealt with too much. Then there was, of course, you do snowboarding and basketball, and kind of staying hydrated when you were playing basketball was interesting. I remember one time Christopher used to put water into his tube with a syringe, And the first time the parents and the teammates saw that kind of freaked some people out. So, but we just dealt with it. It was just part of Christopher's life and part of our life, and it was just stuff that we did. So we just kind of lived our lives around it. It was normal for us, unfortunately.
Yeah. And Christopher did have it since he was a baby. He had his feeding tubes were put in when he was 6 months old. So he doesn't really remember a time that he didn't have them. He just grew up with them. And so for him, it was normal. And I mean, not getting to eat, that was,
Yeah.
I mean, you could.
It was kind of a bummer and everything. I think the biggest struggle, I felt like I just couldn't get enough water in me to stay leveled throughout like the whole game and everything. And I just felt like I needed water like throughout the whole game. And I just wasn't getting enough.
Yeah, because most of us have like stomachs that are almost used as gas tanks in a car. And so we put the gas in and we can go long distances, and that's kind of what our stomach is. But with Christopher, he was like a car without a gas tank. So you kind of had to put little bits in as your fuel to keep you going all the time.
Yeah.
So
it was just tough trying to keep that going.
When you're exerting yourself, that was a struggle. I remember I coached part of Christopher's teams quite a bit, and he was always coming over and getting his syringe shots in his stomach.
Yeah, and his energy level too. It's not the same. Tube feeding is, now that he after the miracle when he eats now, it's so different because he notices the difference in his energy level. He didn't know when he was being tube fed. He just thought everybody had that type of an energy level. He didn't notice the difference. And so that was another thing with sports, is just trying to have enough energy and keep enough calories going in order to support what he was doing.
So with the basketball, he had to put a lot of fluids all the time, and so actually I was the coach and for some of his teams. And when Christopher played at Damascus Christian, which is where our kids went, the athletic director there, her name is Kim Stevens, and she's actually one of the leaders, I guess, in Heart to Heart Ministries for the kids in Honduras. So there was a charity event. The first charity event was a couple of years ago, and then the second charity event we sponsored through our company, Mark Technologies, sponsored a table there, and the guest speaker was Bruce Vanetta. And so he talked a little bit about, actually quite a bit about his story as far as how he got killed, I guess he did get killed. He died and then came back. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, he started telling his story about he has a specialty truck repair in Wisconsin. That's where he's from, and he was working on a huge semi truck, and he was actually underneath it. The truck was partway up on one side. It was on a jack.
On a jack, because one of the front tire was taken off.
Right, the front tire was taken off, and he was working underneath it on this, so he's underneath, working on it, and he's looking over and he sees that jack just go. He could just hear that sproing as it went, and the whole truck actually fell on him and basically cut him in half. And he had 5 severed arteries, which no one had ever survived, having 5 severed arteries. And he immediately wanted that truck off of himself. I mean, that was his first thought. And so the man that was working with him was trying to jack up the truck on the side, and he wanted out from under the truck, but the guy's talking on to 911, and they're saying don't move him, because that's kind of the standard thing to do, is not move someone. But he's thinking that jack is going to go again, and he doesn't trust it, and he wants out. And so he basically pulled himself out. He grabbed the fender and pulled himself out until he got just his head was sticking out. That was all that was out. And then he told us the rest of the story of how that was the last thing that he did. And he was then up on top of the garage looking down and seeing all of the EMT workers and everyone coming in trying to help him. And he's telling this whole story, and he continues and he talks about going to the hospital and everything that happened there. And a man came and prayed for him, and his intestines actually grew, which intestines don't grow. Usually when you lose them, that's it. You're done. They don't grow. You don't get a second chance. And he was actually prayed for, and his intestines actually grew. And he's telling this whole story, and it's really amazing. And a lot of the things that he's telling, as I'm sitting there listening to this, he's using words that I know because of Christopher.
Yeah, they were talking about gastrostomy.
Yeah.
I can't say it.
Gastrostomy
tubes, thank you.
Jejunostomy tubes, Nissen fundoplication, all of these things that Christopher had. So
Here we're understanding what this is, but most of the people
in the
there
room
probably
have no
didn't
idea.
have any idea.
And so it really got my attention as he was talking. And I just really felt like God was telling me, you should go up and talk to him when this is all over. And I kept making excuses. Well, there's a lot of people here and everybody's going to want to talk to him. And then I kind of in my ear again, no, I want you to go talk to him. Well, he's going to be busy. And I've got my friends here because we had sponsored the table and we had invited some of our friends to come, and that would be rude. I don't want to leave them. And God just kept telling me, don't worry about it. They'll understand. And basically by the time it was over, I just decided, okay, I'm just going to go up there. And Bruce was done talking, so he came and sat down, and then I started to walk up, and we started talking, and I started telling him about Christopher, and he says, well, has anybody ever prayed for him? And I was like, well, tons of times.
All the time. Every day.
And he says, well, what would it hurt one more time? And, oh, well, you got me there, sure. And he says, well, is he here? And I said, well, no, he doesn't like to go to charity dinners with his parents. He was 16 at the time. And so he said, he's from Wisconsin. He's not from Oregon, which is where we live. And so he had no idea where we lived or how far away Christopher was. And he says, I'm going to be speaking at this church tomorrow. Maybe your family could come, bring Christopher with you. And he said, I'm going to be giving this same speech tomorrow. And then afterwards come and find me, and we can pray for him and see what happens. And so that's basically what we did. We went home that night. We talked about it. I talked to Christopher about it, about going. And the next morning, we ended up going to Destiny Church here in Oregon, and we listened to Bruce Van Atta speak again, which was really great because then all three of our kids were there, so they got to hear his story and the miraculous things that God had done to save his life, and helping him with the severed arteries, the intestines growing, the whole thing, and so they got to hear all of that too. So just that part was really neat that they got to do. And then during the service, Christopher can kind of talk about that, how he started feeling when Bruce got up to start talking. He started noticing God moving in him even at that point.
Yeah. If I'm more like a pulse in my stomach like the whole time. I felt like a heartbeat kind of like in my stomach section.
Almost like a vibration.
Yeah, it was more like that, like the whole time, like throughout like the whole sermon.
Like a nervous stomach almost, probably.
Yeah. It was a pretty weird feeling, but I never felt like anything like that before.
And you didn't have control over it, you said. It just was kind of like doing it on its own.
And I was just happy, and I was excited because I felt like God was gonna do like something big in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So
you were excited about what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I was really excited.
Yeah,
so after the service, then
Bruce finished talking, and we went up to the front, our family, and we found him just like he'd asked us to do. And the first thing, we had met Bruce, but of course Chris hadn't, and so we introduced Chris and Bruce to each other, and the first thing they did was lift up their shirts and start giving, comparing battle scars, and my tube's here, did you have this, and that kind of thing, and so that was kind of neat. So they kind of developed this instant camaraderie, which was really kind of neat. And then Bruce kind of explained, that he could pray for Christopher, and he said, I don't know what God's timing is, what his methods are or his plans are, because they're all his own and they're all perfect. And he said, sometimes I pray for people and they are healed, and sometimes they're not, but it's all up to God. It isn't anything special about Bruce in particular, that he just is the go-between. He just does the praying, and sometimes God works and does healing, and sometimes he doesn't. And so he told Christopher all of this, and just asked him, would you like me to pray for you? And Chris said, sure. He had nothing to lose. We were all very excited. And at that time, we didn't even know what had been going on during the sermon with Chris, starting to have that feeling. But we all gathered around Christopher, and Bruce started praying, and then kind of tell him what it felt like.
It was kind of the same feeling. It was like intensified, like a lot more and everything. And I don't really remember what he said throughout the prayer. I was kind of like mainly focusing on like the feeling on my stomach. It felt like a vibrating, kind of like in like this region, and at the very end of the prayer, I felt like a shock going. It was from the right shoulder down through my stomach, and right then and there, like I knew I was healed. Like, it was kind of like a sense of relief type thing. Kind of like I was carrying like this burden around me, like throughout like my whole life and everything, and I just felt like just this huge burden got taken off of me, and yeah.
When I was watching the prayer too, or when we were praying along, at one point when Bruce started praying right at the beginning, Christopher kind of went like this and grabbed his stomach, and he says, it really hurts, and Bruce said, do we need to stop, do you need to sit down? And Christopher said, no, I'm okay, we can keep going. And Bruce said, yeah, we need to keep going, we're not done yet. Well, I had to pray with my eyes wide open. I just couldn't close my eyes, because when I looked at Christopher at that moment, the feeding tube that was underneath his t-shirt, and he had just a regular t-shirt on, a light t-shirt, and they would stick out a little bit. You could kind of see them protruding out a little bit. And the top one that we used for draining was vibrating so fast back and forth underneath. I could see it vibrating underneath his t-shirt. And so I was, instantly I couldn't not look at it. So we started praying again, and I watched that vibration from the top feeding tube, and I watched it follow the pattern of his intestines until it went down into the bottom feeding tube, and it was all vibrating and moving. I mean, it was just the most incredible thing that I've ever witnessed or been a part of. It was just, and there was just such a feeling of, you could just feel the sweet weight of the Holy Spirit just with us and on us, and just, it was just like everything was just hyper focused on this. And then we were done praying, and we all kind of went out in the parking lot and looked at each other like, what just happened? It's like, did it really just happen? And
like, I don't know, it took so much energy out of all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And he had a basketball game later that day, so he was going to need a lot of energy. So we went home, and we started to do what we would normally do, and that is...
we started to make the tube, the small tube, to put in his backpack, and I said, why don't you just drink it? Now, normally, if he was to drink it, he would start throwing it up and get very sick. So you drank 2 cans, right?
I think it was about 2 or 3 cans for the day. Yeah.
Everything was normal. Yeah.
It was all
everything
normal.
was normal.
I just chugged it down and everything, and I felt fine.
Normally, within like 10 or 15 minutes, you'd start trying
getting
to
very
get
sick.
it sick and everything.
Yeah.
So you went to the basketball. We went to the basketball game because I was coaching, and on the way home.
Oh wait, and when we were at the basketball game, he didn't even have to use the syringe to put his water in. He was able to drink the water, and then
I just drank it all up.
Yeah, and we started.
A lot better.
Yeah, we started to walk out and head home, and Christopher says, "I'm not sure, Mom, because I'm not quite sure what it feels like to be hungry, because he never knew what hungry felt like because he always had a feeding tube, and so he says, I'm not sure, but I think I'm hungry." And, we kind of looked at each other, it's like, well, what do you want to eat? And because we'll take you anywhere you want to go. You can have whatever you want. He wanted Chinese food. So his very first meal was at a Chinese restaurant locally. And he ordered, I think, yakisoba and teriyaki chicken and all of this stuff. Yeah, and all this stuff. And he started eating it. And, of course, we're all looking at each other like, okay, when's it going to start? Is this going to hurt? And he just kept eating. He ate the whole thing. And we started to head home. And he was like, well, how long does it take? And I said, how long does it take for what? And he says, for it to go out of your stomach. Because we had that top feeding tube, so we could check to see if it was still there. And I said, well, mine's still there, Chris. Dad's is still in his stomach. It takes hours, to completely empty. And I said, if it doesn't bother you tonight, just don't put your your drain on overnight, because we used to drain, all of his saliva out overnight, and let's just see what happens. In the morning, we'll check it and see if it's there or not. And so you went to sleep, and the next morning we checked it. And
and it was totally gone. Like, there was nothing there at all.
It was
crazy.
It was just absolutely incredible. And that was kind of the beginning of everything. And we ended up going back to the doctor, to his GI specialist, and telling her about what had happened.
Well, she was certainly surprised.
Yes, because it wasn't supposed to happen. This was a chronic illness that, if anything,
people don't get healed from this.
Yeah, they expected it to get worse, not better. And she was absolutely in complete shock. But after she got over that, she recovered. She said, well, let's talk about what we're going to do about this. Let's get those feeding tubes out. And so it was a good idea. We had to wait. She wanted to wait 3 months. The surgeon actually wanted to wait closer to 6. So we
that was
settled
pretty
on
tough
5.
though, just because I had it for like 16 years. So I was just like, I want to get these things out right now. Just like, let's take them out right now. And they were like, no, we have to wait. Okay.
Yeah, they wanted
I
some
dealt with
time.
it.
Yeah, they wanted some time to go by to prove that, okay, everything was working. Can he
That was
gain
fully
weight?
healed and everything. Yeah.
And can he maintain weight and all of those things? And so it made sense. So then on April 26th of 2012, he actually got to go to the doctor's office. They took the tubes out, and they were hoping that they would just heal up on their own. But it's kind of like having a pierced ear. When you first get it, if you take the earring out, it'll close up really fast. So they always have you leave the earrings in. Same thing with the feeding tubes. When we first got them in, if the feeding tubes came out accidentally or anything happened, we had to be very careful because they could close up very quickly. But after 16 years of having the tubes in, it wasn't like that. We didn't know. Would they close up on their own all the way or not? They weren't sure. The likelihood of them closing up, having been in there that long, was really, really low. But we thought, well, we'll just see what happens. And so he had them out April 26th, but then on June 28th of 2012, he actually had to go in, and they surgically closed them up. And that was kind of the end of this, the story.
That was the very end. And
it was a pretty amazing
that was
thing.
a great day,
Walking out of the hospital that time, was a lot different than it had ever been before. So it was really, really an exciting moment. So it's amazing what
it was
God
the best
has done.
surgery because because it was like the last one. Like that's like my 14th surgery.
Yep.
Yeah. It was the 14th one. So it was just like, this is it for my whole life. Like, I'm done with all the surgeries. This is it. It felt like it was like a sense of relief and everything. It's just like, it was it was just a great feeling.
We did have, after the surgery, they'd given him antibiotics through an IV before the surgery, during the surgery, and after the surgery, because he had to stay the night.
And I was all drugged up and everything.
Yeah. And then we got to come home, and of course he was still on antibiotics by mouth for 10 days. And so everything was going well, and things were healing up. Everything was looking great. He took that last dose of antibiotics, and within a day or so, an infection. And so we were kind of disappointed.
We knew about infections.
Unfortunately. All too well. And anyway, so the infection started. The top one was fine, but the bottom one got an infection in it. We went back to the doctor several times. They tried giving him more antibiotics. They tried opening it up a little bit, letting that infection out, kind of letting it heal back up. Nothing was working.
So we waited for probably about it was like 5 days later.
Yeah, we tried to work it out, and because they were wanting to go back and surgically open that back up again and clean it out, which we really didn't want to have to do. And then it was amazing what God did, because I got a text message from Kim Stevens, who is with Worldwide Heart to Heart.
Actually, she was coming over to our house to pick up some appliances that we were sending down to Honduras, to donate to Honduras.
Donating.
It was like a washer and a dryer and everything.
Donating to the charity. And so she wanted to know if she could come that day, because she had a pickup truck and some guys to help us load everything. And I said, sure. I was supposed to take Christopher in for surgery, but I'm thinking, it could wait a few minutes. And so she came over, and we were all just kind of standing around in the kitchen and talking, and the fellows she had were loading the stuff in the back of the truck, and Christopher comes down the stairs and gives her, they give a big hug, and how's it going? Are you still eating? And yeah, still eating.
But we
Lifted
have
up,
an
little
infection.
tiny
yeah.
little problem, and so he lifted up his shirt, and she's, ooh, yeah, that's a problem. And so anyway, we just kind of looked at each other, and it's like, well, we should just pray over this and see what happens. And so it was just Christopher and I and Kim Stevens, and Christopher's friend Brianna was here, and we all just kind of gathered around, and Kim actually laid hands on Christopher's stomach and tell him, it was incredible.
I felt like the same feeling. It was all like the vibrations and everything. But then at the very end, within like 2 hours,
Well, didn't
there was like
the infection kind of like almost
Yeah.
like
Squirting
squirt
out.
out?
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah.
The infection just started squirting out, and it did that the whole day until it was out. Everything, all the stuff was
And
out.
within about like 2 hours, like I think it was like
About 2 hours, and then
it was like
all
a half like
closed.
the size. Like it was like
Yeah.
literally like
Just
half the
closed up.
size.
Yeah.
And the rest of it, the rest of it just like a scabbed over and everything. And
By the next morning
it was
when
totally
he woke
fine.
up,
It was
it was all
completely
scabbed
gone.
over and everything.
The
and-
incision that
yeah.
had been apart, it had come apart, as the infection got worse and worse, it opened it back up, because it was stitched initially in the surgery, and it started to open up. But then when she prayed for him, the infection started squirting out, and once it was done, you could just see it. I mean, it was just
It was like literally like closing up like within
right before our eyes.
Yeah,
It was just
insane.
amazing. And the next morning when he got up, it was completely sealed shut and just kind of scabbed over, and it was just like that was
it.
the end. And so to celebrate all of the miracle and everything that had happened, basically 2 miracles, Christopher had always wanted to do scuba diving. And it was one thing that he wasn't able to do. Because of the pressure, having those open holes into his abdomen, it could just blow up. And so, the doctor, no, he cannot do that. So that was the one thing in his life that we could never find a way around, that he never got to do. So this August, in August of 2012, we went to Maui, and he got to go scuba diving.
And it was like the best thing ever. Like it felt like you were flying in like the water. Like it was definitely it was a life-changing experience, because because like where I came from to where I am now, like I can never be able to do that before, and now I can do anything that anything that my heart desires. So
yeah, it's pretty awesome. God is very good.